important topic, social media crisis management, for when, hopefully never, an innkeeper might get in the news in a bad way. Now, this is extremely important to prepare for. Just because you don't know what's going to happen, you could have guests that you thought had a great time and they might have taken something negatively. And unfortunately, because it is online, things like that can snowball. I do have a couple of quick housekeeping things. We are recording this webinar. It will be available on the PI website tomorrow. There also are 3 handouts if you go over to the right-hand side of your screen. If you'd like to download those before or after the presentation, or if you forget to, I will be happy to email them to you. One is a management response homework. There's a reputation management checklist, which gives you a list of sites that let you have review responses and which ones don't, and also some suggested steps for responding to a negative review. If you do have questions, I encourage you to ask them as you have them, and I will address them when the webinar is over. So thank you for attending today. So I'm going to start with kind of the big kahuna, or is the 800-pound gorilla, as everyone likes to tell them. And in terms of crisis management, that's the first place that you're going to want to go to. Now, why TripAdvisor? Everybody knows that lots and lots of people use TripAdvisor, but unfortunately, according to TripAdvisor itself, and this is actually directly from them, I was out at TripAdvisor headquarters late last year and talked to Brian Paella, who is one of the hotshots over there. And he put together some really interesting statistics for me, which were kind of scary in terms of, just the United States. 23,000+ B&B properties, and only less than half of them have a registered owner or have claimed their listing on TripAdvisor. To me, that's a little scary because that means that there's a lot of B&Bs out there in the US, and he gave me some statistics about the UK as well, that aren't even really paying attention to their TripAdvisor listings and their TripAdvisor reviews. Now, of those ones that have claimed their TripAdvisor listing, how many of them have done management responses? And 82% is actually pretty good, but on the other hand, when you break it down a little bit more, 37%, although the numbers don't seem to quite add up, but they do because this is actually including over in the UK as well. That's a fairly big chunk of properties that have a review that have not written a management response. Now, what happens when you get a bad review or bad reviews on TripAdvisor? Unfortunately, those reviews also transfer into Google search and to Bing search. And if you have not dominated the first page of Google search, for example, with your own links and your own social media, your TripAdvisor listings are going to come up generally on page 1. So that's something to be prepared for, because the first place that people will go, especially if something snowballs online, is they will go on TripAdvisor and they will leave a bad review. Unfortunately, once it hits the news, it's not only going to be just that one person that's going to leave a review, it's going to be hundreds, especially if a news channel picks it up. TripAdvisor, at least, will remove the vast majority, if not all, of the bogus reviews, but they can be very, very hurtful. They can impact your search engine optimization rankings. People can take instant screenshots of comments, and once it's out there, you have to really act quickly to stay on top of that. So if you have claimed your TripAdvisor listing, I'm giving you kudos. If you haven't, I really recommend that the first thing that you do in terms of crisis management is to actually take care of that first. And also make sure that you have management responses. I'm sorry, not management responses, but you've also enabled that you get a notification each time a review is posted. If you have multiple people, if you're an innkeeper and you have an assistant innkeeper, or you have a significant other that's also participating in the running of your inn with a separate email address, I also suggest that they get a copy as well. They can be added as an administrator to your TripAdvisor page. And the reason being, of the inns that I work with, I'm also an admin on many of their TripAdvisor sites, and many times I will get an email, because I'm on email pretty much 24/7, I'll get an email finding out that they've gotten a new review, sometimes way before they've even had a chance to look at their email. And in 99% of the cases, they've been good reviews, but there have been 2 instances in the last couple of years that I'm very glad that I was actually online and checking email at the time and saw really horrible reviews come in, both of them completely unbased and unbiased, but you need to be aware of them so you can address them almost immediately. Now I'm going to use a couple of examples. Not sure if anyone has heard of them. This is a place called the Union Street Hotel, and it's actually not a hotel. It's an inn / bed and breakfast, and they hit the news, and this is back in 2014, so this is a while ago, and they put it out there that this was a joke, but that they were going to charge they were going to charge people, $500 for any negative online reviews that got left. This one, whether it was a joke or not, really, really snowballed in a very, very bad way for these guys. This is a search as of 2 weeks ago for Union Street Guest House. And pretty much every listing is coming up with the fact that this all got picked up by news channels. So from the perspective of, because it's online, once one media outlet picks it up, they all start to pick it up. And that's something that you really should be prepared for. Now, this owner said it was tongue-in-cheek and that it actually had only been up as a joke for a very, very short time period. And that is true, that it was only up for a short time period, not like it was said, put on the site years ago. It was not, because if you did a track back on their website with the Internet Archive, it was only online for a very short time. Now, the scary thing about this was 2+ years ago, well, about 2 years ago, and on every single page of Google, I actually gave up on page 21, but I know just clicking through 25, something like 70 pages in on Google, this particular inn is still showing up for this issue in Google search. Now, these guys clearly tried to do some reputation management housekeeping. I don't know whether they hired someone to do it. I don't think that they did. Or if they had hired someone, they probably were not the right answer to them. They did put together recent press and articles that were positive about this place. Unfortunately, most of the recent press and articles were before they hit the news. So any of these links that you go to, for the most part, they're referencing this place before they hit the news in a negative way. Now, the interesting thing about this place is it's closing apparently, and it's closing because they've lost so much business. Because, again, if you go back to the Google search, anytime someone actually just specifically Googles them, they're going to see all this negative information that's still out there literally years later. Now, the interesting thing about these guys was they actually had a Facebook page that they deleted because they were getting thousands and thousands of negative comments on them. They went ahead, I think about a year or so later, and restarted it. Unfortunately, internet people and internet trolls do not forget about them, because there are a bunch of comments on their new Facebook page about, hey, you deleted your old page, we got wise to you and looked for the new one. Which is unfortunate, but that's the reality of it, and that's something that people should also be prepared for, in that normal, rational human beings in this day and age of the internet has turned people, even if their real name is attached to it, into an internet troll. So a lot of the comments that do get written by people are opinionated. There was an inn up in Vermont a couple of years ago that a couple a lady couple had a very, very bad experience with. And, that's unfortunately still in the news as well. And comments from people from both sides of the spectrum, both agreeing and disagreeing with what the owners did and how they handled it, went on for 6+ months, and that business is shut down as well. So this kind of thing, once it hits, it's very hard to mitigate. But the first issue is just being aware of what's going on. Now this is your typical Facebook page, and I'm going to address Facebook because after TripAdvisor, if you have a Facebook page, and a lot of inns do, this is the first place that people will go to impinge on your reputation. If you don't have a Facebook page, I would probably encourage you to have one, but on the other hand, from a reputation management perspective, that can come back and bite you as well. But this would be the first place to go and look at. Especially because a lot of inns have abandoned their Facebook pages or they don't pay attention to them. I have about 3,000 innkeeper pages that I monitor. I have them on a list, and I would say about 60% of them don't post more than once a month, or some have been abandoned completely, but they are still linked from their websites. So if you started a Facebook page, for example, and you only go to it once a month, you're not going to be aware that things are going to be posted on it unless you go and look. Now this is an option that you have on Facebook. I'll go back for a second here. And this tab here, message, is enabled. Now this one is up to you. If for whatever reason your inn does hit the news negatively, and I have mixed feelings about this one because I've heard positives and negatives from innkeepers and for other businesses. It depends on how personal you want to take this, because if you have messages enabled, people will try to message you privately. On the flip side of that, it means that they generally won't put a post on your page, but they will put a post on your page if you don't respond to them. So in a case where you usually have messaging enabled, you may want to uncheck this, and I'd probably suggest that because then, getting a lot of nasty personal comments into your internal Facebook and your internal email can be extremely disturbing. And again, if you don't respond to them and they message you privately, they'll still end up posting publicly, and sometimes it will get worse. Well, I messaged them and they never got back to me. The other option, and this is where a lot of inns, kind of like Union Street Guest House, what they did was they deleted their page. Your best bet is in a crisis management situation is to unpublish your page. There are other options in Facebook where you can disable comments completely. I don't encourage that because that actually makes people even madder. Unpublishing the page doesn't mean you've deleted your page. It just means that nobody can find it and nobody can post on it. Once everything's blown over, so to speak, I would go ahead and unpublish it or publish it back, but still monitor it very, very carefully. Now, the ratings reviews has been around for a little while on Facebook. This is actually a snippet directly from Yelp, but it looks exactly like the ratings reviews on Facebook. I use this as an example because I actually couldn't find a good example of an inn's page that was still up that had bad reviews on it, but it looks just like this, which is unfortunate because people have got, when Facebook first rolled out the star review rating, you couldn't actually leave text on it. It just said review this business, and it was completely random. It showed up on people's personal pages and people just wanted to get rid of it. So you might have had someone that has never stayed with you before, that had no connection with your business, and you have a 1-star rating from them and no text. So in some cases, you have these stars way, way back from 2013 and the beginning of 2014 that have no connection to you whatsoever. Now, it used to be up until about 3 months ago, you can actually hide your review ratings by going to your About section and then unclicking this. So it'll say Show Map Check-ins and Star Ratings on the page. If you uncheck that, it would actually hide your reviews, which was a good way to mitigate some of the negativity that can happen. Unfortunately, because Facebook has been changing quite a bit of things, they've no longer had that option. So now if you uncheck this, your map and check-ins on the page disappear, but you can no longer hide your reviews. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, especially on Facebook, is that while the content on Facebook may not necessarily transfer into Google, because Google and Facebook don't play nice with each other, so to speak, Google can't really see the content coming out of there for the most part, but they do pick up on the fact and ranks very highly in search results that you have a Facebook page. So for this instance, there's his Facebook page, but this isn't actually really his Facebook page. This is a Facebook Places page, which he unfortunately doesn't know about, and his real Facebook page appears somewhere on page 2 of this. Now this is a Places page, and you really should, if you have a Facebook page yourself, go out and search for orphan pages or Places pages. You can merge them. It'll say, is this your business? But there's also reviews on here. Oops, sorry. And you do want to make sure of that, because your Places page now in search is coming up ahead of an actual business page that you might have created. One of the other new things to keep in mind, and this is critical now, is the Better Business Bureau has now been rolling out in the past 8 months or so that you can leave actual reviews on a business page itself on the BBB site. The BBB will not let you know that there's reviews on there. You can do a review response. You do not have to pay for a paid listing with the BBB, but you do have to register with the BBB in order to leave a review response. So this one, for example, has 2 negative reviews, and I kind of doubt, unfortunately, that they have this. And this is interesting because if you look at the timestamp on this, this is actually, BBB has been experimenting this for quite a while, and it's been sporadically being rolled out by region. This is one of the first ones that it rolled out to, this region where this bread and breakfast is. Now, Google has recently changed its search as well, so that instead of Google paid ads appearing onto the right-hand side of Google search, your actual reviews for your Places page, and this is a little confusing because Google originally had Google Places, Google Maps, and you had reviews on it. You could claim your business listing, you could respond to reviews, and then when Google Plus rolled out, they rolled your review systems into Google+. Now they've separated it again so that you can now have reviews on your Places local Google Places listing, and also as well on your Google Plus listing, which is very confusing for some people, but one more place that you have to monitor, unfortunately. Now you can do a review response both on Google Plus and on Google Places, Google Local / Google Maps. I really recommend that you do that because it certainly is impacting SEO. If you do have someone that has left a negative review for whatever reason and it starts to snowball, just like on Facebook, you can expect the trolls to come out, unfortunately. What you can do at that point is you can flag them, and it will walk you through what you're reporting them on. Google will generally remove reviews that are threatening, that are against. They will not remove a review if you can't prove that they actually weren't a customer, but a lot of the trolls out there say some very nasty things, so you can get the majority of the reviews removed. The best thing to do realistically, if you have bad reviews on Google that you can't take care of and that will stay on your listing forever, wait for a few months until everything has blown over, and then just write a nice response. We're sorry this happened, we're moving forward with it, and just leave it at that. Because if you actually try to respond to the trolls, they troll even more, which is unfortunate. Some of the other things that you can do with some of these people that do leave troll reviews is you can report them, and you can say this profile violates user content and conduct policies, and just make sure that you not only flag them, but you fill that out as well. That just gives Google one more instance of actually having to have real eyeballs on looking at your reviews instead of the automated system, which is realistically what it is. Now, Yelp is another one that innkeepers really don't pay attention to, unfortunately. And they really should, even if they've never had a review on Yelp. Yelp impacts your search engine optimization results very, very highly if you have a listing. It's not safe if you don't have a listing, though, because anyone can come along and create a listing for you. You can, because you're the business owner, claim it, but that doesn't stop someone from creating the listing for you. So be prepared. If you don't have a Yelp listing already, I would recommend going and actually claiming the Yelp listing and then making sure you optimize it and you have it all set to go just in case. And a couple questions that just came in. What about Swarm and Foursquare? Swarm I actually wouldn't pay attention to. I don't think it hurts to eyeball it. I don't think, honestly, it's going to stick around in terms of usage. Foursquare, definitely claim the listing on them. If you don't have one, I would create it and optimize it and monitor it. And then should we create our own listings for everything? You know, that's a good question, and I'll actually address that. I was going to address that at the end, but I'll address that now because it's a really good question. You don't need to go crazy, but I do recommend that you create listings on enough things for a couple of reasons. One is search engine optimization, especially because if you go and you look at Union Street Guest House, for example, they have their website, they have a Facebook page, they have TripAdvisor, they have Yelp. They don't have any other social media. When an inn has other social media accounts, and even if they're only updating them sporadically, what tends to happen is they then are dominating the first page of Google search. So, you know, have a Twitter account, even if you're not really going to use it that much. You can create a feed from Facebook that goes into Twitter, so anything posted in Facebook, for example, will automatically feed into that. You know, if you can have a blog, very, very good for search engine optimization. Instagram, I'm personally on the fence about, and only because, you know, the people that are using it for the most part are the millennials, and I have not seen people being attacked on Instagram except for big business. So like Coca-Cola, for example, they were in the news, I think, was it last year, for making a mistake on a Russian map in an advertisement. And they did get harpooned on Instagram, but I have yet to see any lodging, and I'm talking about hotels, motels, B&Bs, the gamut of any type of lodging getting pinged on Instagram yet, because it's such a visual thing for people. I don't think people actually think about that. So thank you for the question. That's a really good one. So Yelp, for example, and there's a couple of things with Yelp that you can do to fix things like this, is Yelp lets you upload many, many photos of your own. And this was kind of a creative use of someone that was obviously extremely annoyed. So what they did was they actually took screenshots of the review and review response that I guess they got into a bit of a tiff of the inn owner online, and they took screenshots of it with their mobile phone, and then because those were actual photo images, they posted them into Yelp. Now Yelp will not let you remove photos. If something like this happened, you do have the ability to, and it would be a little time consuming to do, but well worth it, is to go in and upload 500 photos of your own or 300 photos of your own, just so in an instance like that, it would be completely buried because nobody's going to have time to scroll through on Yelp 300 photos or 500 photos. The other thing to keep aware of too is you might have a great guest review on Yelp, and this isn't really crisis management, it's more of just branding, and how people look at your inn overall. And I see this a lot on Yelp bed and breakfast postings. Oh, we had this fantastic bed and breakfast stay and the breakfast was awesome, and here's a really gosh darn awful of the waffles we had for breakfast. Or, a horribly bad lit photo of the lovely room that they stayed in that's obviously not taken well. And unfortunately, because they're very unprofessional photos, they give your place a bad image. So when in that instance, it's important to go over there and again, find a bunch of good photos of your own and just upload them into the listing. Now Yelp has something called filtered reviews. This listing up top is actually in public reviews, and if you go on to, a good example if you want to find what I'm talking about is go on to pretty much any restaurant active listing on Yelp and scroll down to the bottom. It will say we have a number of reviews that are not recommended, and you can click on those and it will bring you up to, you can scroll down further and you can see additional reviews that are in there. Now that's important because Yelp is they're a lot more difficult to get them to review troll reviews. A lot of times they'll leave them and they'll leave them for a while. If you ever have something like this happen, you actually have to go and pester them literally on a daily basis and say, this is not cool. You need to review these, remove these, because they're obviously trolls. They've never stayed with me. They're just being difficult. The other perspective of this is, though, that if you ever have a guest come and they leave you a Yelp review and their review isn't showing up, it's showing up in the filtered reviews, it's because in this case, for example, this is their first review. They have not filled out, if you clicked on Vicky S, they've not filled out a personal profile, and they haven't uploaded a photo. And Yelp takes this into account when they're actually posting the public reviews. Because if you look at the vast majority of the filtered reviews, that 90% of them don't have this. It's the first one, no profile, no image. The other ones that get filtered out, they might have done 3 reviews, they might have done 30 reviews, but Yelp has an algorithm, especially for good reviews, that what will happen is if a number of keywords in here pings the automated system, it will automatically filter those out. Now, what are some of the tools that you can use if you do get dinged online? Now, one of them is TripAdvisor listing owners, is you can send them basically a submission request talking about specific things. The first one to address is that first negative review, and also add the fact that others of them are being added, sometimes on a minute-by-minute basis, that need to get addressed. If you do not hear anything back from TripAdvisor, similar to Yelp, just start bugging them. Email them on a daily basis. Start calling them on a daily basis if you have a phone number. There are some phone numbers floating around that you can contact them. If you ever do need one in a pinch, or if you'd like me to send them to you, I'd be happy to email them to you after the fact, and some additional emails that are not available in the system that you can email. But stay on top of it. TripAdvisor itself, even though it's a huge company, keep in mind that they have something like 150 million lodging companies that are listed on TripAdvisor, and they only have, a certain number of employees that can actually deal with real people. So you just have to be a pest. That's realistically what it boils down to. Now, this is probably one of the most important parts of doing reputation management, especially if there's any concern, and even if there's not any concern, because again, as I said in the beginning, you could have great guests that come, you think they had a great time, something happens, and it turns into something bad, and then it snowballs in line. So set up Google alerts about your name and your business name. And there's a couple of reasons why you should do this. Google Alerts is free, by the way. If you've never used it before, I highly recommend doing it. It's great for reputation management. It's also great for if you yourself or you're in or in the news, you might win an award for something and they haven't even let you know about it, got written up or quoted in the paper. There's another one called talkwalker.com that has a free listing and a paid version. You don't need the paid version. But sometimes they'll find things that Google Alerts misses. Now, when you do Google Alerts, you can set up multiple ones. I recommend always putting your name and your IN's name in quotes. The reason being, if you put in your name as Jane Doe In, for example, and you just type it in as Jane Doe In, it's going to bring you back results for Jane, it's going to bring you back for Doe, and bring you back results for N. Anything you put in quotes will return that search string. And I'd recommend doing multiple ones. So, Jane Doe Bed and Breakfast, Jane Doe B&B, and then add some additional things. So if you're in New York State, maybe in quotes, Jane Doe B&B and then NY or New York State or New York written out, because that will give you more specific things. You also want to know about your name too, though, because, and I'll give you a case about a month and a half ago. A friend of mine over in the UK owns a B&B, and there's another innkeeper with a similar name that owns a B&B in a couple of neighboring towns away, and the other innkeeper got arrested for fraud. And luckily, their Google Alerts let them know about it, and it happened to be that the other innkeeper was now, this innkeeper in question, my friend, was getting phone calls having cancellations because people were seeing their name in the news because they were fairly well known locally. And so she had to do a little bit of, kind of positive reinforcement. And so she started putting out there on her blog and actually making a kind of a big joke about it. No, we're not so-and-so from so-and-so, and just letting people, taking it literally, and I know I probably shouldn't say it this way, but balls to the wall, head on dealing with us. Because in this particular case, she had nothing to do with her particular name being in the news badly, but it was impacting her reservations. Now do a search for your name in your business, and even though you're going to have Google Alerts set up, which should technically take care of most of this, they miss things. And you want to make sure that you do this, I would say at least once a month. If not, do it once a week. Take 5 minutes on Monday morning, every Monday morning, and just check out what's out there online, because you don't know what's going to pop up. There's also, unfortunately, things that might pop up about your employees, your former employees, and some other things that might be linked to your name that you don't know about. I'll give an example, a couple of instances. One a few years ago, and this wasn't an inn, but it was hospitality, where a cook at a restaurant out in the Midwest was posting publicly on Facebook that, and his name was Damien Cardone, and he'll still, if you do a search for him on Google, his name will still pop up. But he was going around on his personal Facebook page saying that, gluten-free is a bunch of hooey, and anybody that thinks they're gluten-free, they're crazy, and, I serve gluten pasta to gluten-free guests. Well, of course, people took screenshots of that. It hit the news. And unfortunately, what happened is the guy that owned the restaurant was this poor little old Italian guy, completely not tech savvy, computer savvy at all, and he didn't even know his business name was in the news until I think it was CNN was calling him. So you don't want that kind of thing to happen, unfortunately. So just keep an eye out. So especially if you had someone that was an employee, perhaps they came into clean rooms part-time, they were assistant innkeeper, that left maybe under a negative cloud, put those in your Google searches just to monitor. And also, and I know it's kind of a bit like stalking your employees, but check out your employees' social media accounts. So if you know for a fact, or you can look, that they have a Facebook account or a Twitter account or an Instagram account, I would suggest monitoring them, because if they do talk about your business, other people are going to see that, and that can impact both your search engine optimization results, because that can pop up in there, especially if it's on Twitter, because that impacts SEO now. But you want to know what's going on. Now, some of the other things that you can do, and I'll take Facebook for example. I highly encourage, if you have a Facebook business page, and this is positive reputation as well as other things, when you have your Facebook page, ask your friends to like the page. Now, why do this? One, it increases your physical like count on your page. And you may think, well, they're ins, they're relatives, they're never going to actually be guests. But you want them to do this for two reasons. One is, when they like your page, all of the people that are connected with them are actually going to be seeing that, so you're branding your business. And the other reason, if for whatever reason you do start having negative reviews on your Facebook page and you don't want to disable it, you don't want to unpublish the page, as I mentioned in the beginning, you want to encourage friends and relatives to actually post positive things on here. And while that might seem kind of underhanded, think of it from the perspective of guests. A guest is not going to know, for example, and I'm just using this as an example, I have no idea if they're related or not, that this person has any relationship to the Brewster Inn. So all a viewer is going to see, a potential guest is going to see, is that there's positive reviews. Now, if you do use this technique, and one of the reasons to do this is because if you have negative reviews, by encouraging positive reviews on here, you're going to push those negative reviews way, 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 way down. And this is best done, like say your inn hits the news in a bad way, you're going to wait a little bit to implement this, because this can backfire on you. You want to really wait until it's toned down, or unpublish the page first and then go to this option. Because if someone sees this and they come back afterwards, they will write a comment on here. But they're not going to know that these people are related to you. If you are going to use this tactic to do this, I wouldn't ask all your friends to write positive reviews at one time. Ask them to write them a little bit at a time so it looks like it's spaced out. That's just one of the techniques you can use to kind of move those ahead. The other thing that you can do is, if you're on Facebook and you have people leaving negative comments on posts, do not delete the posts, whatever you do, because that will turn a normal person that's gotten a little bit of their knickers in a twist for whatever reason, that will make them mad. And then they'll start posting more. What you do want to do is you want to hover over the comment, and I'm sorry, I should have taken a screenshot of this, and there's going to give you a little X next to it, and it's going to say hide, which means that the comment is actually still there, but it's now only viewable to you and to that person, and people still think that that comment, whoever wrote the comment, is still there. You can also ban that person from commenting on the page too at that point. Now, Twitter is one that you really should monitor. Again, even if you're not going to actively use it, because people do write about B&Bs on here. Most of the time, I would say 95% of the comments that I've seen on Twitter since I've been on for the last, I think, 7 years, have been very, very positive. But in the cases of Union Street Guest House, for example, that I mentioned earlier, in a couple of other cases where B&Bs have hit the news and the national news, people will go out and they're not necessarily going to find your Twitter account, but they will make comments about this. So you want to be able to monitor this and just see what's out there, because this does impact SEO. Twitter had a deal with Google several years ago where Twitter results were actually showing up in Google search. They cut that. It was called the fire hose a few years ago, but they've actually fairly recently enabled that again, and I am now seeing Twitter tweets show up in Google search again, so it is something to be aware of. And you do want to be able to respond, especially to be able to respond to positive reviews. Because if you have a Twitter account, again, people do talk to people on Twitter and you can get potential guests on it if you choose to use it. But also to know that it is out there, and you want to make sure if you're going to be active and try to do some reputation management, you can't delete the negative comments, but you can push those reviews down. So if you start talking to people, for example, when someone does a search for your B&B in Twitter, because there's a search option in there, very much like Google, that any search results, people are going to see you having positive conversations with other people. And again, you'll just scroll down, and people don't really scroll down that far. Now, the other thing people might do is, if you do have a Twitter account, is to monitor if you're in Hits the News, whether you have been put on a list or not. And lists are usually used only to aggregate information, but they have been used in a negative way. For example, like people might put you on the list of, I never want to stay here, which is not necessarily a good thing to be on. If you get added to a list, and there's two different types, there's public or private, you won't get notified if you get added to a private list, but then again, nobody else can see that either, so that's actually okay. But if you get added to a public list, you can actually see that. And if you get added to a list that you don't like, you can actually go to that person's account. So for example, I got added for some reason, and I hopefully it's a good one, recently by the Talent Pirates to a list called Management. Now, if I didn't want to be on this list, I can go over to their own Twitter account, and then I can block them. By blocking that account, it takes me off of their Twitter list. This is actually useful too, because I had an in call me recently and say, these people added me to a list called Grandma's Doily Inn, or something like a Grandma Doily Inn. And this particular B&B is definitely not a Victorian Grandma Doily Inn. They're a kind of an Art Deco, very, very modern inn. And I think that hit a sore spot. And I walked her through how to block that person, and she's so happy that she was off this list. So it's just that so if people add you to miscellaneous lists, I mean, I got added to a list last year for, I think, grant writing, of which I know absolutely nothing about grant writing. And it was a little flattering, but it was also a little deceptive because I don't know anything about it. Now, buying reviews, you really should check the terms of service. And when I mean buying a review, it's basically giving an incentive for someone to write positive reviews. Now, one of the first inclinations that a B&B will have is, there's two different venues for this. There's actually companies out there that for a fee will hire staff to write positive reviews for you. I highly discourage doing that. It does not look well, and I have yet to find a company that does it well. And it's very unscrupulous, but even more than the unscrupulous part of it, they don't do a good job, and it's very apparent that the people that they're hiring to write reviews for you, usually English is not their first language. So if that gives you a reason not to have them write a review for you, that might be the first tip off. It's probably not a good idea. Most of them, the terms of service say you're not allowed to buy reviews, but Yelp and TripAdvisor very much do encourage people to leave reviews. That's not to say you can't give people an incentive privately. So if you really wanted to push the review incentives, if you have an email list, for example, you could send out an email to a well-curated list of past customers saying, we're so happy that you had a great stay the last time you were there. And by the way, if you'd leave us a review, we'd really appreciate it. And by the way, just make sure that you tell us next time you're here, and we'll make sure that we have a free glass of champagne for you, or some other type of small incentive. Because it's going out by email, it's not against the terms of service, and you're technically not buying it. You're not giving them really an incentive to do that. If you do this, just be careful how it's worded and just be careful that that's not public. Now, this is one of my biggest pet peeves out there, is because if your in hits the news in a negative way, the first place that they're going to go before they go to TripAdvisor actually is they're going to go check out your website. If they see this, for example, become a fan on Facebook, or we're on Twitter, you're giving them the links to go and rate things about you directly to your own social media. Unfortunately, if you've abandoned your social media, that's even worse, because then you're giving them that information right offhand. If you're not going to use Facebook, that's fine. If you're not going to use your Twitter account, that's fine, or your Google Plus account. I have absolutely no problem with that, but please take them off your website. More than anything else, and from a marketing and branding perspective, if I'm a potential guest, and I'm in my mid-40s, I'm not a millennial, but a lot of the trend now is for people to go on a lodging website. The first place that they go perhaps is to your rooms and rates page after spending a very, very short time on your home page. Or they will go and check out, if they're big Facebook users, they'll go check out Facebook. Or if they're heavy Twitter users, they'll go check out Twitter or Pinterest. So just make sure, again, if you have these things that you have accounts on, but you're not actively using them and paying attention to them, please take them off your websites. Now, location, location, location. This is a really important one, because if you are asking people for reviews, and this is very, very important in terms of reputation management, in terms of if you're trying to mitigate something that's happened online, make sure that you do not ask people to leave a review, especially a positive review at your inn. TripAdvisor and Yelp records your inn's IP address, and if you have a review written at the inn, it automatically will get flagged as being written by you, and it generally will not get published. If it's a negative review and it gets written at your inn, it will get published. Now, why is that? It's because all of those are done by algorithm, similar to Google search has an algorithm about how things show up on page 1 versus page 20. So the theory being, if someone's going to write a negative review, you as innkeepers are not going to write a negative review at your own inn. So only the positive things are going to be filtered out that are associated with the IP address. If it's leaning towards a negative review, that automated system is going to say, well, this is okay to post, because obviously a business owner isn't going to try to put themselves under. So does anybody have any additional questions? And I know we had a couple of people log in late. So for you, those of you that logged in late, we have been recording this. I'd be happy to send you a copy of the recording, and it'll also be posted on the Pi website tomorrow. But there's also handouts off to the right-hand side. There's 3 different ones if you'd like to download them before we go off, which will be a few more minutes. And if you don't get a chance to, please let me know, and I'd be happy to email them. Okay, and so we do have some questions that came in. So how do you check each list? Could you be more specific when you say check each list? Do you mean in Twitter? Okay. If you can bear with me just for a second, and I will go to my Twitter account and I'll show you. Okay, so right now, this is the back end of Twitter. This is when I log in, I see this. If I go to what's technically my home page, I'll see that I have lists here. So if I click on lists, I can see these are ones that I have created, for example, and if I click on member of, then I can see ones that other people have added me to. So see, I didn't want to be on, I like to be on tourism experts, but say I didn't like to be on tourism experts, for example. These are all of the members that she has on here, but this is done by Karen Thorne, who, if you're on Twitter, I highly recommend you following her. She is the lodging Twitter queen. So maybe a good thing I used her as an example. But if for whatever reason I didn't want to be on that list that she's on, I'd go to here and I'd click down on the menu and I'd hit block. And that would automatically kick me off of that list. Okay. And let's see some of the other questions that are coming in. Oh, how do we incentive, I can never say this, how do we get people to leave more positive reviews? Okay, that's a good question. In terms of getting people to leave more reviews, usually email is the best way. Snail mail is the best way. I'm not in particular fond of people saying, please leave us a review, because, and a lot of inns don't feel comfortable with that because it seems a little tacky. And that's actually how several innkeepers have described it to me. They said that just seems tacky or just not right. Don't necessarily have to leave it as they're not asking for a review. You're asking for feedback. And what I would recommend you doing is, if you're going to do that, if you haven't already, start curating a list of people that have stayed with you in the past 6 months to a year that you know for an absolute fact have had a wonderful stay. Go out and find, if you don't know already, whether they've left reviews for you. Curate that list and then word something up very, very nicely by email or snail mail or however you'd like to do it, and say, we know that you were a fairly recent guest here and last year. We hope you had a wonderful experience. In an effort to always improve how we run things, how our business is, we would very much appreciate it if you would leave us a review if you had a wonderful experience here. Word it in a way that if they had a slightly negative experience or they didn't have anything, they're not going to take the time to do that. But this is a gentle reminder that if they had a great time, they should go ahead and leave a nice review there. And in terms of asking for feedback, a lot of people will say, yeah, I'll give you some feedback, but I'm not going to leave you a review, even though technically it's the same thing. Now, when you have someone that you've asked politely to give you feedback, make sure you always, always, always go online and write a response to them. Say, thank you so much for writing that review. We really appreciate it. We hope to see you back soon. You know, always, always respond to that. This is a little bit off topic because it's not necessarily in regards to crisis management, but it is a question that I get frequently is, should we be responding to every review? My personal feeling about this is yes, you should be. You'll get a lot of mixed responses from other people about this one. They say you should only respond to bad ones, you should only respond to the really, really good ones, you should be selective. But my feeling about positive reviews is someone has actually taken the time out of their day to log on to TripAdvisor or Yelp or whatever other format they have and actually log in, think about the review they're going to write, and write it. My feeling about that is it creates a more personal engagement if you actually go on and you thank them for taking the time to do that. I mean, not literally saying, you know, we appreciate that you took time out of your busy day to write us a review. And don't make it generic. I see a lot of hotels doing this and they do it badly in terms of they do respond to every nice review. Unfortunately, it's canned. It's, thanks for the great review. We hope you'll come back and see us soon. But realistically, if you're going to respond to the good reviews, make sure that you customize it a little bit. We had a fantastic weekend and the owner was so nice. He recommended going out to go boating in Ashland. You know, make sure that you mention a specific that they mentioned. You mentioned our great signature French toast. We've had that for years. That was my grandmother's recipe. Personalize it. They took the time to do that, so personalize it back. Snail mail is a great way of doing that. And the other thing too is because things like Yelp, they do filter out if you don't have Yelp accounts, for example. You do want to make sure and sort of tell people, if you're a frequent TripAdvisor user, we'd appreciate it if you'd review us on TripAdvisor. Actually tell them, if you are a frequent Yelp user, review us on Yelp or Facebook or Google Plus, for example, because then you have more likelihood that people will see things like on Yelp, for example, and TripAdvisor. People actually see how many reviews that person has looked at, and that actually also influences other people that look at it. Because if you see someone that's left 30 TripAdvisor reviews, a lot of people now will not just read the reviews, but if there was something really interesting about the review that they wrote, they'll actually go over to see what else they've reviewed. And it's interesting because I've asked a lot of questions about people that use TripAdvisor a lot, and they say they actually take that into account, because if you have 30 reviews that you've written, and every single review you've written is really, really good, people see that and it tweaks them as a little bit off. If you go on and you see you've left 30 reviews and a quarter of them were not good and half of them were not too bad, and then you had like 10 that were fabulous, that's more the likelihood that people will actually come across as that's a real person rating those, as opposed to the innkeeper rating them, as opposed to friends of the innkeeper, as opposed to a bot review. So people actually do, and people are becoming a lot smarter, because with so much information out there about how many fake and fraudulent reviews out there, I think people are starting to actually sit up and pay attention to what they should actually be looking at for what's real and what's not real. So does anybody have any additional questions? Okay, that looks like it. If you do have any additional questions that you think about after the fact, please let me know. I would be more than happy to try to answer them. Again, we got a couple of minutes left. There are the handouts. Okay, oh great, one more question. Do our personal Twitter accounts have to be business to business oriented, or it can be they personal? You know what? That's a great question. Or B&B oriented. Okay, that's a good question. You know, like I'll take my personal account for example. I use it for business and I use it for personal. I've made a lot of personal friends on Twitter. If I ever have my own B&B, I will start a separate bed and breakfast account up just for that B&B. And while it will be personal, I think I'll be very cautious about posting, as they say, the kids say TMI, too much information. But you do want to be personal on it and personable on it and helpful, but just avoid posting anything like if you have, it's just, I guess, look at it from the aspect of, if you were in a cocktail party, if you wouldn't talk about it, if you wouldn't talk about politics or religion, that's the kind of thing that you would put definitely on a personal account. And if you are going to talk about that, don't put in your Twitter bio where you work. I've seen that. I'll give you one more bad example of reputation management. There's an innkeeper in Maine whose assistant innkeeper was tweeting very, very negatively about the inn and their guests. And unfortunately, in their Twitter bio, it had where she worked on it. And thankfully, she got caught. She got fired very shortly after that. But it's just, and that's what I mean by going back to talking about monitoring your employees' Twitter accounts or ex-employees' Twitter accounts. So thank you very much for attending this afternoon. I hope you got some good information from it. Again, please ask me if you have any questions at all, and I'd be happy to answer them. So have a great day, everybody. Take care.